on the fruit of the Spirit. Galatians 5:22 says, "But the fruit of the Spirit is love, joy, peace, patience, kindness, goodness, faithfulness, gentleness, and self-control. Against such there is no law." I like that. Against such there is no law. Now we've been talking about joy and how fellowship brings joy. I look around, I see that, just people fellowshipping and talking with each other. Just being with other believers brings joy. I know sometimes, I've had so many times people will tell me, my week was just horrible, I didn't want to come today, and then I just dragged myself in, and I'm like, well, okay, is there a good part of this story? And then but then I started talking with people and just I got together, and I'm so glad I came. Being with other believers brings joy. And, excuse me, Paul and John talked about that in their writings. And there's even a deeper fellowship, koinonia. And that word, I think of like Fellowship of the Rings, and how there is this deep, that wasn't a banquet, it wasn't a potluck. Fellowship of the Rings was a group of people together on mission. And they had a common interest, a common goal. And when we're on mission together, that's part of our fellowship, is that we're on mission together to share Jesus. And also how joy comes from seeing the end. Why are we even in this? Right? Jesus, for the joy that was set before him, he endured the cross because he could see the finish line. For sure, we got to know why we're doing this. Because not every part, I don't know, you guys might not know this. This might be news. Not every part of the Christian life is easy. I know, you didn't know that. So I know it's coming as a shock and a surprise to some of you. But sometimes following Jesus is difficult. We're okay? All right? So, not every church preaches that, but it's actually true. So, but when we know why we're in this, that's like everything that we're doing. If you're going to the gym, why am I doing this? Just because this is just painful. There's results that we're going for. There's a goal. We're looking to Jesus, the author and the finisher of our faith. Amen? Amen. All right, so moving on today, I want to stay on joy just a little bit longer. And we read it last week in Psalms, how in the presence of Jesus is fullness of joy. And so in God's presence is fullness of joy, right? We got that? We know that in God's presence. Well, how do we get into God's presence? Well, Psalm 100, verse 4 says, "We enter his gates with thanksgiving and his courts with praise. Give thanks to him and bless his name." When they were going into the Jerusalem temple, the holy temple, we say, go in with praise. Go in with thanksgiving into the presence of God. So when we go into, you want to get into God's presence, start thanking him. Start praising him. That's why we praise and we worship in the beginning of the services, because we're going into the presence of the Lord. And as we do, we begin to feel his presence. And as we thank him, as we glorify him, that's why sometimes you ever just, when you come in, you feel lousy, and then you start to praise, and you start to worship, and that's giving thanks to the Lord, and then you start to feel joy, right? Because that's how we get into his presence. It's the entryway. It's the door. Amen. And here's the thing. It's pretty hard to be miserable and thankful at the same time. You ever notice that? It's it's hard to be depressed and grateful. Like really grateful. Like really thankful. Not like fake, we're not talking about the thing. Oh yeah, I'm just thankful. No, we're talking like really grateful. Like, hey, you know what? I'm really grateful that this is like this, and I'm thankful to the Lord. And it's like all of a sudden we feel like, I'm starting to feel that joy come in here. It's going to be all right. Psalm 95:2 says, "Let us come into his presence with thanksgiving and make a joyful noise to him with songs of praise." I like that joyful noise part because that's what my singing sounds like. Joyful noise. Now, there's no better example of this connection of thankfulness and joy and grace than we see in Holy Communion. And I want to show you something really cool here. And this is Communion Sunday, so this actually works great. Luke 22, verse 19 says this, "And he took bread, and when he had given thanks, he broke it, and he gave it to them, saying, 'This is my body, which is given for you. Do this in remembrance of me.'" Now, the word thanks there is the word eucharisteo. That's where we get Eucharist. When they talk about communion and they have the Eucharist, this is where they get it. Giving thanks is eucharisteo. And I want to just read this because it says it better if I just read it. Voskamp says, the root word of Eucharisteo is charis, meaning grace. Jesus took the bread and saw it as grace and gave thanks. Eucharisteo, thanksgiving, envelopes the Greek word for grace, charis, but it also holds its derivative, the Greek word chara, meaning joy. Eucharisteo, thanksgiving, chara, and joy. See, Eucharist, in that word we have thanks, grace, and joy.
Amen.
I mean, think about Jesus. He's hours away from the crucifixion. He sits down with the disciples to have a meal. The meal that will forever be remembered for all eternity to commemorate his crucifixion. Right? This is hours away. And he sits down and he has the joy of the Lord set before him. The joy set before him of what. So he's got joy and he gives thanks. I mean, sometimes, for me, if I know I'm facing something really hard, it's hard to be thankful. But he gives thanks right there because he could see what was going on. He gave thanks with joy for the meal that would forever commemorate his death. And yes, it was for the joy set before him. Looking to our redemption, but there's also something more that I want to point out. See, because how do we say, okay, so sometimes I don't like to have just a sermon that just says, be thankful. Right? Okay, great, thanks. Can you hook me up just a little bit more than that? Because, sometimes, there's things where we just say, love people. Okay, make a choice and love people, but help me out a little bit, because I want to know how to do that. And so, to be thankful, a key element of thankfulness, and then, of course, by extension, joy, is when we align our values to the values of Christ.
Amen.
See, we saw it even with Jesus. Now, I like to say this. Whenever I see if Jesus did something, we better do it. Because he's perfect. And if he needed to do something, Jesus would always pull away and pray. Jesus would do, it's like, okay, if Jesus needs to pray, I need to pray a lot more. Right? And so what we see is Jesus in the garden, when he says to the Father, he says, not my will, but your will be done. Even Jesus as perfect aligned his will, aligned his heart to the Father. He aligned his values to the Father. I like the word values because our will has to do with our desires, has to do that come out of our values. See, what we want comes out of what we value. You know what I mean? If we want a fancy car that's the best of the best, because we value whatever that comes with that. If we don't care about it, it's because we value something else. And so what we love is connected to what we value. Amen? You follow me on that? And so it's kind of like if you tell kids, after they had a fight, you can be like, okay guys, give each other a hug. Yep. And they go like this. And you didn't even hug me, so So did they obey? Kinda. Yeah. But the value of, what's the value the parent is trying to say, love each other and make up, but the value has to be there for it to be real. So sometimes it can be sort of obedience, but if the value and the love is not there, then it's really not going to be any good. You follow me on that? See, because values precede real obedience. Amen? See, value, and here's the thing with value. Value is not an opinion. Okay? Like, how many believe that the Bible is vital to Christian living? You believe that? Okay, everyone pretty much believes that, right? We believe the Bible is vital to Christian. We need it, right? We need it, right, to live our lives, right? Now, don't raise your hands on this. How many spend time in the Bible every morning because you need it? Right? How many people eat every day? Right? So yeah, we do it because we know eating is vital to living. And so, and this is, I know I'm gonna kind of step on a toe and poke you in the eye a little bit. All right, so it's all right. Just say out and trust in His grace and love. But you know what? Here's the thing: if we say it's vital, but don't live like it's vital, then it's not a core value. It's an opinion. It's a theory. Now, okay, listen, I'm not trying to pick on anybody. One of the best things that we can do is just realize that and then God's grace takes us like a wave over to where we need to be. And we're always, I'm out. And we're always in like this, listen, we're always a work in progress, okay? So it's not condemnation. It's just like, hey, if we're lost, the first thing we got to know to get where we're going is what? Where am I? Right? So if we think we're somewhere else and we keep going in another direction, but we're not actually there, then we're just going to keep staying lost. So if we realize, and that was the best thing for me when I realized I didn't love Jesus. That was the best thing in my Christian walk. I'd been a Christian for years, and I finally realized, oh, I don't love Jesus, I just like him. And I was like, it hurt. But you know what? It was like, that's where I am. I'm right here. And I need to go to loving Jesus. Well, now I know the direction I can start walking. And I started walking and growing in my love for Jesus. And so when we understand if we have a real value, or if it's just an opinion, then we can, that's something that's like, has some meat on it. You know what I'm saying? It's something that we can do about it. It's something we can go in a direction for. And it affects our value. See, a value will affect behavior. So we did one time, years ago, we did this thing, and I did this whole thing about core values. And it was like, what was it, like a, not a conference, but like a seminar, or, but I mean, it was like a little seminar or something, and they say, what are your core values? Write them down. And so everybody first starts out by writing everything that they know is important, right? You know, and we wrote our core values. And then they had the coaches, they had like coaches at your table, and they come up and they're like, all right, so this is your value, so how much money you spend on that? And then and what they do is kind of expose, like, all right, here's the things you think are values, but they're not. What are your values? And so like sometimes we would realize, okay, I'm really valuing this. And and I'm not valuing it, and that's okay, this is good, and it's like, and everybody has, obviously we have to have the core values in loving, following Jesus, but we also have other core values. Like for me, fun is a core value. That's what I discovered there. Fun is a core value for me. I like to have fun. My wallet, my time, my kids show it because we do things that are fun. We like to enjoy each other. People, relationships are a value, and different things. But I found out some of the things I thought were values were not values, and things that I didn't realize were values were values. It just helps understand. And so, but what happens is when something's really a value, it is visible in our daily lives because we spend time, energy, money, whatever on it. Amen? You follow me? All right, so I'll give you another example is that here in the church, loving our neighbors is a value. And so like last year, we gave away about 35% of our income towards missionaries, outreaches, different things like that. Our goal is 50% because we're trying to get there. I think we're going to do better this year. And so just to say, you know what? Jesus said, love your neighbors as yourself. It kind of seems to make sense. 50% here, 50% there. That's kind of like loving your neighbors as yourself. And, not every church has to be that way. It's not wrong for someone to do it another way. That's just a value that we've adopted and we're growing in it being a thing. And so if we said loving our neighbors is a real important value, but we never reached out to them, never go buy turkeys for them, never, do outreaches and ministry for them, then we would say it's an opinion. It's an idea. But anyway, what I think is kind of cool though is like even as a small church, if you just sow more into the community, you can have a church 3 times as big, but if you're only doing 5%, we get to be a bigger blessing. Amen? It's exciting, and I just love it. I just think it's great. But anyway, I digress. I was thinking of another friend I know, and I actually can't even remember his name. He's a pastor in Foursquare. I see him at every conference. I just call him Brother Love. Because we're having a small regional conference in Daytona, and everybody is welcome to go. It's just a Sunday night and a Monday. And what's the dates?
November 4th.
3rd and 4th of November. You guys are all invited. And anyway, he'll probably be there, and I won't have to tell you who he is, because when he comes up to you, he's going to do this. He's going to say, hey, I love you. Mm-hmm. And here's the thing, he just says it in such a way, like I believe him. I feel like I'm like, If I asked him to go out and help me wash my car, he'd be like, okay, let's go. You know, because that's how I receive love, when I get my car washed. So I'm like, and every time I see him, he does that, and I'm like, brother love. So whenever I see him now, I'll be like, hey, you love me? He's like, I love you, and he just will give me a warm hug. And you know why? Because to him, he has the value of expressing love to people. Not just love him, but for him, it's like, it's important to express and make sure people know that. That's a great value, and it's evident in his life. John 15:8 says this, by this my Father is glorified, that you bear much fruit, and so prove, or you could say show, to be my disciples, as the Father has loved me, so have I loved you. Abide in my love. If you keep my commandments, you will abide in my love, just as I have kept my Father's commandments and abide in his love. These things I have spoken to you, that my joy may be in you, and that your joy may be full. How many's got room for a little more joy? Right? Don't we all? Amen. I want full joy. Right? Well, he just told us how. As we abide in Jesus, and his commandments are like things like love your neighbor, love God. As we begin to follow those commandments, and as we begin to abide more in his love, he says our joy will be full. As we value Jesus, his word, and all he values, it becomes easier. See, because when we connect to that vine, when we connect to the heart of Jesus, it just becomes more natural for us to love what he loves. It's like, you ever have, some of you remember being young and in love? Remember that a long time ago? All the men, make sure you let the husbands do it. Yep, I remember. She's looking. She's watching. I remember. So, and so, John, you work on that. But you remember, like, she might be interested in something that you weren't interested in, and all of a sudden now you're interested in it, right? Because I know one guy, all of a sudden he's interested in anime. I don't know. I don't want to call out my son, so shh. I'm just playing. He's going to tell me why I'm wrong later. Don't worry. It's fine. I'm totally confused. Don't worry. But it's when we're interested and we love somebody, all of a sudden the things they're interested in, we naturally start to be interested in the love. Because that's just kind of normal. And as we grow in our love for Jesus, his values, what he's interested in, becomes important to us. And that's stuff like souls. That's stuff like worship. That's stuff like getting closer and growing in characters. All of the things of Christ become more easy and appealing to us because we begin to get his value and his heart. I remember one time when Ben's dad, who was also named Ben, came to my house. We hadn't seen him for years. And he came over to my house, and I was showing him all of the things that I've done. I've done some work in the kitchen, turned the garage into like a little movie theater. And so I remember this distinctly. I'm showing him around, and he was very interested in all the stuff that I did. Because he works at Home Depot, he's very handy, he does a lot of work. And I remember he was like, when I opened the door to the media room, I'm ready to show him all the things, and get all this affirmation, that I was looking for. And he was like this is, you be me, come here, you can be me. Come on, stand up, man. A little mini version. Okay, all right. So he's like, I'm talking, pretending like you're talking, blah, blah, blah. He's like this, he's like, pushes me aside, goes in the media room, and begins to ignore me. You know why? Because he saw my kids. You can have a seat. Thanks, Andrew. Give him a hand. He did it. He saw my kids, and he valued them more than he valued my rehab. And I loved it. For a second, I was like, hey, I'm still talking here. What? And then I saw him just embracing the kids and saying, you're so big. You look great. I love you guys. Hey! And he was all excited. And I was like, that's great. And that's loving me more than loving my stuff that I made. See, sometimes as Christians, we get more on the building, on the stuff, than we deal with the stuff that's really important. We gotta have structure, there's like kind of mechanisms to ministry and to church, but the people are more important than the mechanism. And when we get that heart, and I was just like, that's just like the heart of Jesus, man. Just go love those kids. And I was like, that is so great. So don't forget to tell your dad I said something nice about him in church. So make up for all those other things I said about him. I'm going to show you a couple more quick examples. 2 Corinthians 8:1. This is Paul writing. He says, we want you to know, brothers, about the grace of God that has been given among the churches of Macedonia. For in a severe test of affliction, so they're having a rough time, their abundance of joy and their extreme poverty have overflowed. That's a real mix, isn't it? Have overflowed in a wealth of generosity on their part. For they gave according to their means, as I can testify, and beyond their means of their own accord. Wow. You know, there's this church. They are under trial. They're under difficulties and tribulations. They're all broke. And what? They're giving this to help the believers in Jerusalem who were in real dire straits. And they took up an offering. And these people were like, we are excited to do this. He says they're like under persecution and trial and broke, and they're full of joy. Usually like I gotta work on that when I'm broke, right? You know, they're broke and full of joy because you know what? I still got something I can still be a part of the mission. I'm excited and like, woo! Why? Because you know why? You can't just make that happen. You can't just sort of be like, hey, have joy in trials. No, you know why? Because they had the same values of Paul and the same values of Jesus, and they're like, oh man, this is great. We get to be a part of this. This is, oh, thank you. I can help. Let me do something. And they just found joy in it. It was just natural for them because they had those values. They valued the same thing God valued. People. Look at Paul. Philippians 1:12 says this. He says, I want you to know, brothers, what has happened to me has really served to advance the gospel. So Paul's in prison. He's writing to the Philippians. And it's kind of funny because you read the text and he's basically trying to kind of be encouraging to the Philippians. He's in jail, he's in prison, he's bound, and he's like, hey guys, you know what? It's okay. It's okay. This is actually working out for good. So he's kind of giving thanks there. Verse 13, so it has become known throughout the whole imperial guard and to all the rest that my imprisonment is for Christ. And most of the brothers, having become confident in the Lord by my imprisonment, are much more bold to speak the word without fear. He's like, it's okay. I get to tell people about Jesus. Because that's more important to me than my freedom. That's what he's saying. He's like, because you have this, everything is a scale. You know everything's a scale, right? Everything has this many value points in our life, right? It's like, I don't want to spend that much because it's not worth that much to me, right? But if it's one of your kids, it's like, yeah, whatever. I'll do whatever I got to do, right? Everything has different value points. His comfort had this many value points. I'm sure he liked to be comfortable, like anybody. But his sharing the gospel has so many more value points. So he's like, oh, well, yeah, it's okay. You know, it's like, if it was raining, pouring out there, you know, like a hurricane out there, and you might be like, I'm gonna wait a little bit inside. But if there was bricks of gold out there, and you said they're free to anybody who wants them, you might be like, okay, a little rain won't hurt anybody, right? You know, I mean, because our value systems are based on these things, and so when we value him and value his mission, it changes everything. And so just to go out in the rain, nobody's gonna be like, hey, that's great. Unless there's gold bars to pick up, you know what I'm saying? They'd be like, oh, this is great, you know, because you follow me? So, anyway, I remember one more story. Oh, I'm gonna have to skip some stuff. All right. So, one time when I was first the associate pastor over at Gateway, and this is like a long time ago. It was like 15, 18 years ago, a long time ago. He went on a trip with his family somewhere where I guess they didn't have cell phone coverage. I think it was out of the country or something. I didn't have his flight information. I was supposed to pick him up at the airport. I'm calling him. I think they were in Israel. I'm calling him and can't get his cell phone. No response to email. I'm like, I don't know what day he's coming back. I'm supposed to pick him up at the airport. I'm the new guy. So I'm like trying to call relatives. Nobody knows. So finally, like, I get a call from his wife, and she was with him, And she's like, "Oh, our son picked us up, but there wasn't enough room for the luggage. So he's on the super shuttle," which is, if you've ever ridden a super shuttle, it's awful. The super shuttle goes to like 20 other stops before it gets. Somehow they have the super shuttle figured out that whoever is on there will always be the last person off. I don't know how they do that, but somehow you're always the last one. Anyway, so I'm like, oh my gosh. So I go to their house because I'm just gonna apologize, be like, "I'm so sorry," And so I'm sitting there and I'm waiting, and like they got pizza. Like, "You want some pizza?" I'm like, "No, I don't think I can eat." And so I'm waiting for him to show up. He shows up, and like an hour later, and he's all happy. I'm like, "What's going on?" He's like, "Hey, we missed you." But you know what? On the shuttle, and this guy was, the driver of the shuttle was like of a people group that he had a real heart to reach out to. And he's like, "We talked about Jesus the whole way. It was great." And I'm like, "Praise the Lord, that's great." And he's like, "Yeah, it's all good. And he's like, "You better hope he goes to church on Sunday." I was like, but you know what? Because something more valuable than being on time, something more valuable than a ride when you're tired, was in front of him, which was sharing Jesus with somebody. He had joy anyway. Amen? Yeah. And I can't really read to you Philippians 1:18, but he talks about how he rejoiced and how he trusted in God no matter what had happened. But for us, see, we can get to the point where we abide in Jesus so much that what matters to Jesus matters to us, that we won't worry about these other things.